Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for convening again for the Commonwealth Youth Forum. And today we're going to be taking more of the theme, which is going to be taking charge of our future. How many of you guys are taking charge of your future? With a show of hands? Yes, let us endeavor to do that. So the session is going to be moderated by me, and we're going to be really taking a listen to people who are taking a forefront to develop adaptable solutions that our communities are looking for. And so, like a wise man said, a leader is not about someone with a position, rather the one with the ability to bring about positive change, which I'm pretty sure is something that we're all looking forward to do, leave a mark on or a footprint on this earth and making a positive change or changing someone's life for the better. So the session this morning has a different format. It's not going to be more of a panel discussion, but more of something interesting. We're going to be taking a look or listening to different storytellers of solution makers coming from different parts of the globe. How exciting is that? Are we ready? Yes. So I know you're all excited to hear from our storytellers, but the first is exceptional. You all know that for someone to exceed, appropriate supporting systems must be put in place. Our first storyteller is coming from the United Nations Development Program. I know his tireless passion to the young people and environment is very particular and very important to him. Please help me welcome Mr. Maxwell Gomera, the resident representative of UNDP Rwanda. You're very welcome, sir. A round of applause, please.
Thank you for the introduction. Very kind of you. Good morning. Maramze. You know, everyone thought she was wrong until she was right. My mother went to every bank in town looking for a loan to fund her business. But like many startups during her time, she could not find a bank that believed in her. She was obscure, as was her business. And over time, she was overtaken by overwhelming events and very rapid shifts that were happening around her. Thinking back, I think that my mother would have benefited from a financial system that understands Africa. A financial system that understands how robust and energetic the African startup system is. A financial system that understands the difficult conditions under which we operate, but we still thrive. You see, I grew up in a small town in Zimbabwe called Kadoma. My mother was a greengrocer. She sold tomatoes for a living. She put food on the table. Her family's table and her customers' table. I remember the times when I walked through the suburbs with her, a big dish of tomatoes on my head to deliver tomatoes to her customers. We were running at the time the first Uber Eats service there was. And my mother kept copious quantities of notes on her customers. She knew what to deliver, to whom to deliver, what sort of tomatoes they need, and in what quantities, what days they would need them, and who was able to pay that week or was able to pay after a month. My mother was running the first Know Your Customer service that many banks would have understood today. But, and I know that she had a dream of living in one of the big houses that were in the neighborhood, which were frequently occupied or owned by many rich white folk in our society. But because her business was based on sourcing tomatoes from farms and selling them the next day, there were limitations to what she could do. We had no refrigeration, so she could not keep many tomatoes. We had no power to put greenhouse gases, so she could only rely on just-in-time service. So there were limitations to what her business could do, and she could not expand. And times were hard, especially for a woman. At the time, the currency was losing value. And there were lots of some groups, rebel groups, that were creating problems in the country. And soon she could not continue expanding her business. By the time the government got a grip on the problem, the big supermarkets had taken over her business, and with that, our livelihood. Now, I take inspiration from my mother's story when I look at the state of startups in Africa today. Like her, they do not have access to financing. The financing they need at the right time in the right amounts. Like her, they are rejected by many in the financing ecosystem, but in the broader ecosystem that we work with. Like her, they are obscure. And like her, their go-to-market strategies are still not as effective. And they don't have access to the mentorship that is needed today. Yet, they are the future. Napoleon once described Britain as a nation of greengrocers. I think today he would have been pleasantly surprised to see that out of those greengrocers grew business giants that we know to exist in Britain, and grew a robust banking system that we know to exist in Britain today. After a year of searching, my mother finally secured a loan from a relative. She built a strong business. She supported her family. And although today she is not here to witness it, her son, the one that she helped through school, is today the resident representative of the United Nations Development Program here in Rwanda. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Ms. Patterson, who I had a chance to talk to before I came on stage today. She's got a wonderful story that she's going to tell you. She also told me that she's Chelsea by association. So no one is perfect, ladies and gentlemen. But please, let's welcome Rihanna to the stage.
Thank you so much for the introductions, Maxwell, and good morning to everyone. It is truly a pleasure to contribute to dialogue at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. My name is Rihanna Patterson, and I'm a social entrepreneur and founder of the Dominica Dementia Foundation. We are a youth-led dementia charity that raises awareness of dementia, provides emotional support to families and caretakers, and facilitate research towards dementia. I must say, although I have all of these titles, I am just a normal citizen trying to build the world that I want to see. I believe we all have a duty to make this world livable for all. Okay. Can I see a show of hands who knows what dementia is? Okay, we got a few. But for those who don't know, I'll explain. So let's say you've got an umbrella, and you've got Conrad's, and you've got Hutchison's, Parkinson's, and 100 more people that can't fit under the umbrella and they're getting rained on. That is literally what dementia is. Dementia is an umbrella term that is used to describe diseases caused by brain injury or brain disease. So this is my story. My grandfather passed away with dementia when I was 16. I saw him go in and out of the hospital. We were very close. We used to play cricket together, play dominoes. We had a good time. And it was really hard to see him in this way. He started to deteriorate quite quickly, and I felt hopeless. So I turned to my good friend Google, and I decided to type in, what is dementia? How can I support someone with dementia? I started to bring pictures of us and the family in hopes that he'll remember. Eventually he did, but it was 3 days before he passed away. I say this to say that someone with dementia can be someone's grandfather, someone's grandmother, an activist. There is more to the person than the dementia. I built a community of dementia advocates to channel in this message and change the narrative for good. One way the Dominica Dementia Foundation has proven to pioneer this cause is through the Dominica Dementia Friends Program. This is an initiative that provides the amount of support and information needed to understand what dementia is, how you can support, and how you can tell a friend. We've been able to channel in this message to even government officials to undertake this program. Another exciting program that I'm currently championing is a Dementia the Island Journey. This is a personal project of mine. This is one where I will tell stories of Caribbean older people. This is where we are going to change the narrative for good. A lot of the time, older people are categorized as vulnerable, suffering, fragile, fragility. But we need to change this message. It's quite key in us changing how we support, how we talk about older people and dementia. I am hoping that we'll be able to embrace ageism, embrace elderly or older people, and just, I guess, have a youthful perspective to dementia and aging. I believe that there needs to be intergenerational collectivity to champion on this cause. According to Alzheimer's Disease International, every 3 seconds, someone gets dementia. And I must say that every millisecond you age, and you've probably aged in milliseconds listening to me. Not because my talk is boring, I hope, but because that is how progressive aging is. So please, bear this in mind when you're building your future projects. Build it for old people. Build it for young people, and build it for future generations. Thank you so much for listening to me. I will now introduce Mr. Edward Lee, CEO of Gid Funds Social Ventures. Please make him feel welcome.
How many of you here run organizations? Non-profits, social enterprises, startups? Good number. You know, when I first came here, I wanted to share an inspirational story about one of the social entrepreneurs which we supported, but all the good work we have done. But I think I very quickly realized that we've got enough inspiration among us. Incredible speakers running incredible organizations. And so instead, I thought that perhaps I'll share failures. I'll share 2 instances where my startup almost became obsolete and I almost quit. So I run Gift Funds, and we're a non-profit impact fund. We were started in 2017, really with the idea of investing in neglected social enterprises. Think social enterprises in rural areas, tier 3, tier 4 cities, where capital doesn't flow. When my co-founder and I first started it, and this is really the first instance where we were almost ready to give up. We knew that there was this problem, but we had no idea where to begin. Essentially, we started lending from our own pockets to friends who are social entrepreneurs. It kind of worked out for a while, but we very quickly realized that what we were doing was quite illegal. We had to find a way to make it legal. We had to find a way to lend to social enterprises. And it took us a better part of a year, talking to state regulators, federal regulators, financial regulators across the board, to actually create an entity which was legal to lend to social enterprises. Everybody told us it was impossible, from lawyers of the largest foundations to the government. We almost quit. The second time came 3 years in 2019, when at the latter part of the year, one of our major donors pulled the rug on us. By that time, we were doing very well, on paper at least, externally. We were raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. We were doing very well. But then we quickly realized that without the money actually in the bank, we couldn't lend to a lot of the social enterprises we promised to, and we had to deny them. Obviously, in early 2020, we all know what happened. COVID happened. We dispersed all our capital, told our social enterprises you don't have to return it until you have the ability to, and basically put the business on hold for a year. We couldn't do anything. Our job was to disperse capital, but we had none to give out. What made things worse was that in late 2020, the government came on and said, from now on, you can't raise foreign capital and you can't disperse it onto social enterprises. All our capital was foreign capital. There was a year and a half ago, and I'm glad to say we kind of persevered on. We did well, and we're a better place than we've ever been. But social entrepreneurship and running organizations trying to disrupt the system is hard. And for those of you running it, I'm sure you understand it much better than anybody else. When you're trying to change the system fights back against you. Today I'm running 2 organizations, Give Funds, which was the fund which I just described, as well as Masraf, a Swiss digital bank, but not for the wealthy. Instead, we want to provide safe dollar accounts to people in distressed economies, countries with high inflation, broken banking systems, governments or banks which steal people's money. While the wealthy in many of these countries can bank their savings overseas. We want to provide that to everyday people. And my journey is still very young, but already I see so many difficulties. While we're doing well now, the system is fighting back against us. And for you social entrepreneurs out there, for you who run non-profits, I just want to let you know that persevere. Because it's not easy changing the system. But if it's not us, then who is it? I would like to introduce the next speaker, Sylvia Macario, who's the CEO and co-founder of Hepta Analytics.
Morning. I can't hear you guys. Good morning. If you want to hear from me, I need to hear from you as well. Thank you for that. My name is Sylvia Macario, and I am the co-founder of Hepta Analytics, which is a company that actually started here in Rwanda, with my co-founders being from Carnegie Mellon University. I'm here to talk about 3 things. About data, why data is important, and why we started Hepta Analytics. We were young, very ambitious. We are still young. We were looking into focusing on how we can integrate African languages to the rest of the world, including them to the web. Obviously, we talk about the digital divide, but then the digital divide is always exacerbated by language. You go to the web, you can't find African languages. You can't translate the web to African languages, which is 2,000 plus languages in Africa. What that means is that your cousin or your grandmother in the village can never understand whatever you're talking about if you show them your smartphone or your web application that you're working on. So that's how HEPTA was born. We were trying to make sure that the rest of Africa has access to the economics of the web, make money out of the web like the rest of the world. When we were starting out, obviously, as I said, very ambitious, we knocked on all doors trying to find data to enable the translation engine to work as it should. Because when you're trying to make a translation engine, you have to ensure that you have enough sentences. For example, if you want to translate Kinyarwanda to any other local African languages, let's say Igbo language, for example, you need large amount of data sets to ensure that that works and things are not taken out of context. We tried as much as we could, and obviously reading up on why these sentences were not available, we know the history of the continent, colonialism, where most of us were colonized out of our languages. So most of us don't even speak our languages. We struggle to speak our languages. We had to pivot because that was not possible at the time, and no one was willing to fund us to make sure that that mission was possible. We tried to pivot to other things that make sense. So we asked ourselves the question, how can we enable African organizations or institutions make better and quality decisions using the available data? So that's how we divested to other things that made sense. Help agricultural ministries, help anybody involved in development make better and quality decisions, either in serving the people they are serving in a better way or in a way that makes sense. But then you take a step back. Data is sensitive. What are you collecting whenever you're collecting data? You have to ensure that whenever you're collecting data for the people you're serving, you're also masking the various aspects of the people. When Rihanna spoke about dementia, it's a very sensitive topic. Insurance companies come in and start looking at how many people have dementia in this area, and then they increase the amount of money that you have to pay for you to access insurance. So you have to be very careful as well as a data practitioner in how you showcase the data. So we have had to learn all the various ways to ensure that as much as we are in this space, we are also protecting the people, because at the end of the day, it's the people that you're working for. And we always often talk about this in a joking way that when we started out, we almost thought we could be associated with Cambridge Analytica, which was messing around with elections in the African continent. So we had to keep a low profile and work through the process fully bootstrapped by ourselves to ensure that we are doing the work in the right way, but for the African continent. That's my story, and I hope we continue with the journey of trying to integrate Africa the best way we know. Thank you. I'm going to introduce the next speaker, who is Angelo from Karisimbi Tech.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Igitego Angelo. I am Rwandan. It's quite a pleasure and an honor for me to be standing here, engaging with you. I also would like to welcome you to Rwanda. For the people who came, from outside of Rwanda, welcome. It's in my life growing up, I've never imagined that my country would ever host an event like this. because growing up, I grew up in a country that was torn apart. And so this is unbelievable and makes me happy. So my story is a story of pain, but also empowerment. I come from a very humble background, and I co-founded the company that builds electronic medical records. And what we are doing is we are helping hospitals to operate in a paperless way, but also linking various stakeholders of the healthcare sector. That means the patients, the providers, the payers, or the insurers, and the policymakers, the government. The government of Rwanda has done a lot of work in terms of building infrastructure. Speaking on the healthcare side, hospitals built on a daily basis, and nurses and doctors are given scholarships. But this one time, I took a family member to the hospital, and I realized that we were spending so much time on the queues. And I spoke a bit to the doctors and nurses, and like, but you have computers, why are you using papers and pens? So they told me their situation, and I undertook an initiative of building this company. So fast forward 3 to 4 years now, we have helped more than 200,000 people get treated through that technology. And we are also now starting to help insurance companies to collect data in a paperless way. So to me, that's quite big. And the message that I have today is, one, to the youths that are here. Please, let's take care of the future by providing and working on problems that we face in our lives, in our neighborhoods, in our communities. And secondly, to the government representatives that are here, please empower your young people, listen to them, and give them room and platforms, to innovate and to provide solutions to the problems that we face. As a special thank you note to the government of Rwanda, to His Excellency Paul Kagame, to the ministers, the Minister of Youth, the Minister of ICT, they give us young Rwandans, room to innovate. And by room, I mean, number one, what they give us is time, their time. They listen to us. And when we provide our input, our feedback, that something is not working, I have seen them going out of their way to ensure that those problems are solved. That's pretty much it. Thank you very much again for attending. And I will introduce the next speaker, who is Shomi from Awareness 360. Thank you.
How are we doing today? Good? Okay, the room is very quiet. Did you not get enough sleep like me? In case I trip over my heels, please don't laugh at me. I didn't get any sleep at all. Anyway, it is an incredible honor to be speaking at the Commonwealth Youth Forum in the presence of so many outstanding young people from all across the Commonwealth. I think one of the beautiful parts of this forum is the fact that we not only get to share our shared challenges and the common goals and the issues that we face in our respective communities, because you see, I understand that we all pretty much know what's happening in the world. We see the numbers, we watch the news, we get the statistics. But what is beautiful about this forum is that it also brings together all of us to share each other's stories, to learn from each other's journey of hope, of success, of hurdles. And from each other, we can learn how we succeeded, how we overcame those hardships. My name is Shomi Hassan Chaudhuri. and I'm a water, sanitation, and hygiene WASH activist from Bangladesh. I never planned to be a WASH activist. My passion for WASH was stemmed from one of the most tragic events of my life. In fact, the most tragic event of my life. In 2014, 8 years ago, on a bright sunny day, which also happens to be the Bengali New Year's Day, the biggest festival of the country, unfortunately, my mother passed away from diarrhea. She was sick for only 1 day from diarrhea, and it was diarrhea that killed her. She went to work the day before, and the next day, she was gone forever. It was shocking, it was devastating, it was simply unacceptable and unfathomable for me. Because I never had issues in terms of access to wash facilities. My mom knew how to wash hands properly. We had a toilet to go to. We had safe drinking water access. Yet, I lost the most important person in my life. And then I thought that if this is what happens to me, coming from an educated background, from a well-off family, what about those communities who are out there who don't have access to education or awareness? Which is when I decided to take action. I knew that I needed to step up and do something about it. Obviously, I cannot bring back my mother, but I can definitely save other people from going through that lifelong regret and trauma that I still carry with me. So 4 days after my mom's death, I conducted my first WASH campaign at a sewerage workers community, which is often referred to as the community of untouchables. They're extremely stigmatized and isolated. But I thought that they are the ones who needed to know about all these different aspects of WASH. And when I was telling them the story of my loss, I could see the incredible power of storytelling and how they could relate to what I was saying, how they were paying attention to me. They were probably able to put themselves in my shoes. And that is really when I realized that this is exactly what I want to do. That is how I found my passion for WASH. A few months after, I met my best friend, Rijvi, who you also heard from yesterday from the opening panel. We were talking at a burger joint, just casual conversation between two friends. And we figured that we both have different passion areas. Our values resonate very much. And then we decided that we want to build a platform for other young people like us who would also like to work on their passion. And that is really how Awareness 360 was built. Today, Awareness 360 is a youth-led global nonprofit organization that is working across 30 countries, across Asia, Africa, and Europe, empowering thousands of young people and directly benefiting 1.1 million people across the world. We have come a long way, but during this time, definitely we have had hardships, we have faced challenges, but today, in the interest of time, I'd like to share two key insights that we have learned from this journey. The first one, leveraging the power of technology and innovation. A platform that was started by only 2 people is now shared by thousands of people around the world. And it was only possible because we were able to leverage very basic tools that are at our disposal, such as social media. Very recently, we started a new hydroponics project in the agri-tech field, where we are building a vertical hydroponic tower with AI incorporated in it in order to provide food security for thousands of refugee inhabitants at one of the most climate vulnerable islands in the southern part of our country, Bangladesh. So there are so many different ways that you can address these challenges by leveraging the technology, by innovating things. You don't have to invent something completely new. You can use the resources that are at your disposal and try to come up with a better way, a more efficient way to address those challenges. And talking about efficiency, that leads to my second point and the last point for today, which is the power of collaboration, the power of partnerships. In the last many years, we have partnered with several organizations and entities and companies, and we have really seen how this is the most efficient way to reach our shared goals because our resources are limited. If we don't work together, then we will probably achieve our goal, but at a slower rate, and it might be too late by then. So I hope that as you finish this forum, as you go back to your home countries, you also seek out some potential partners, some potential collaborators in this very room. And as you go back home, you can execute on those shared plans. And it is also important to note that when we talk about collaborators and partners, we often only restrict ourselves to companies or organizations or nonprofits who work in our own sector. But it is also important to mainstream the sustainable development goals in all our activities. We often see that if you're working on gender equality, then you're only doing projects on gender equality. If you're working on climate action, then only focusing on climate action. But I think it's so important to understand that all of these goals are intricately interlinked. Just to give one quick example, we focus a lot on WASH campaigns, at least our team in Bangladesh does. But the Awareness 360 leadership team consists of girls and women, more than 70% of it. And we recently appointed a mental health and well-being officer to provide free and confidential and professional mental health and well-being support for every staff and member of Awareness 360 who needs it. So even though we could have only focused on WASH, but we are also trying to consciously and actively incorporate gender equality, advance our efforts for gender equality, climate action, and all of these other relevant goals in different ethos and parts of our organization. So I would like to encourage you to not only focus on your primary area of work, but also try to mainstream the other sustainable development goals within these, within whatever you do in your own respective ways. So that is it from me today. I would like to now invite the next speaker, who is Mr. Josh Whale, the CEO of Ampersand. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Josh Whale. I'm the CEO and a co-founder of Ampersand. We're a startup based here in Kigali. I'm originally from New Zealand, as you might hear. You got any New Zealanders here in the room? Woo! All right. So we work with electric vehicles. We're electrifying the millions, tens of millions of motorbike taxis and commercial motorbikes that operate across East Africa, Central Africa, and West Africa. Based here in Kigali, we also just recently opened in Kenya. I've been here in Rwanda for about 6 years now. Firstly, I want to congratulate the youth movement on your work on climate change and getting climate change much further up the political agenda. We see now elections where climate change is the #1 defining issue. Do we have any Australians here? Any Australians in the house? Well, welcome back, Australia. Fantastic result there. And we need to keep seeing that. We need the youth movements to keep shouting and making noise and scrutinizing decisions and making sure politicians are held to account and keep their promises. So Ampersand, we've developed an electric motorcycle battery pack, a motorcycle combination that makes going electric simply cheaper and better than using a petrol vehicle. We build battery packs that we designed specifically for this purpose for 100 to 150 cc motorcycles. We build these bikes and batteries right here in Kigali in our factory, not too far from the middle of town. We currently have about 400 motorcycles on the road already, covering about 1.6 million kilometers a month. That's 4 times the length from the Cape of Good Hope to Cairo every single day. But there's a lot more to do, with about 20 million taxi motorbikes operating across most of Africa. So my story, coming out of university, I watched An Inconvenient Truth. This is dating me a bit, but this is the Al Gore movie, all about climate change. My now wife and I, then girlfriend, we both watched this movie, and we realized that climate change was going to be our cause. But first, had to take a normal job to pay the bills. We actually moved to China, where I worked as an intellectual property lawyer. At the time, China was well on its way to becoming the world's largest carbon emitter. And so I did the job to pay the bills while my girlfriend worked for little or no money at a series of NGOs and going to grad school until she could actually make a living after about 5 years and support both of us. but actually work on climate change. Then I quit my job and then started working on the startup. And so my wife then supported me for about 5 years while I built up Ampersand and didn't earn a salary. But the idea for Ampersand actually came while I was in China, around 2009. I saw three things happening. First, Elon Musk put out the Tesla Roadster. Suddenly electric vehicles were becoming sexy. But at the time, there were maybe 7 million electric bicycles in the Western world and 1 million, less than a million electric cars. And at the same time, right there in China, there were 200 million electric scooters and bicycles and three-wheelers. They were slow, very basic. They looked like they were made by Mattel in the 1980s. Maybe that's a bit that I'm dating myself again with a 1980s reference. And then the second thing so there was two things we saw. The third thing was that lithium battery prices were coming down every year. And so things that you couldn't electrify before because it would cost too much suddenly became viable. We're suddenly becoming cost competitive. But those changes, those tipping points don't actually happen by themselves. It takes people, it takes entrepreneurs to identify those opportunities for what couldn't happen yesterday but can now happen today. And so putting those three things together, I started looking for opportunities for really mass market electrification, not starting with electric vehicles for rich people and a niche, Tesla Roadsters for George Clooney and his friends, but actually where the fundamental unit economics would drive towards electrification much sooner. So looking for large fleets of vehicles, lots and lots of people spending lots and lots of money every day on fuel. And that's what led us here to East Africa, to these, where about half of all the vehicle traffic you see in East Africa, including here on the streets of Rwanda, are motorcycle taxis. And these drivers of motorbike taxis spend more money every year on fuel than buying a new motorcycle. And on top of that, they also have to spend a couple of $100s on oil changes every year. So that's the origin story, and that's how we got. And I hope there's something in there that's useful for some entrepreneurs in the room. I'm going to finish with 5 tips. First, do what you believe in, because you'll just be better at it. And I highly recommend climate change, even if you care about, if your cause is conservation, if your cause is poverty, human rights, nutrition, health, agriculture. These are all also climate change issues. And climate change is an issue for your cause. There is no future warming world where that is not a disaster for all those other causes. Second, look around you. What's different where you are? What's different in places that you know? A disadvantage can even prove to be an advantage. Here in Rwanda, it takes about 4 hours to go often on very good roads, but because of the topography, because Rwanda's the land of 1,000 hills, it can take 4 hours to drive a distance that a drone or an electric aircraft could cover in 20 minutes. That's an advantage. This is why zipline started off in Rwanda, not in California. All these petrol motorbikes are why we started here with our motorcycles. Third, embrace the small country advantage. It's a lot easier. There are less layers between you, the young entrepreneur, and government decision makers in countries like the Bahamas and St. Lucia, New Zealand, Fiji, Sri Lanka, and Rwanda than there are in much larger countries. So take advantage of that. To those countries, I encourage you to embrace that, to be nimble and quick in making decisions. You might not be the largest commercial market, but you can be the first. You can be the test country. And Rwanda is really embracing that opportunity. So look at Rwanda if you're considering starting an electric mobility or electric aviation startup. Fourth, startups are not just companies where you're able to wear a t-shirt to work. Remember that they're a science experiment. They're a lean, cost-efficient, rapid science experiment to prove out a technology or a business model. And you must be working closely from day one. If you're not embarrassed by your first prototype, someone told me once, if you're not embarrassed by your first prototype product, you've waited too long. And 5, one particular tip or opportunity is look at Carbon markets. Some things have come out of COP recently last year. Be aware of what's happening in the news and what things are, again, what's possible, what's happening that weren't before. Max, who spoke first, was highlighting that Rwanda is going to be setting up an exchange for carbon credits. There's a lot happening in that space as well. And then I'm going to offer a sixth tip, not for the entrepreneurs, but for those who actually write checks to the international development community that is standing there and funneling and wants to help on climate change. But beware that the time limits that we have from climate change are very, very short. The hour is very, very late. If it takes you 1.5 or 2 years to make a grant of $500,000, if you're an investor from a fund and it takes you 8 months to write a check for $50,000 or $500,000, that's just too slow. Now, I was fortunate that my wife supported me during those years where I didn't have a salary, but we had 2 grants that took 1.5 years to get. Young entrepreneurs, and especially in places like Rwanda, can't just eat sand for 1.5 years while they're developing their product. And so that's fundamentally an issue of social justice. Here I am as a middle-class Mzungu, white boy from New Zealand, but for a young Rwandan entrepreneur, that's just not going to work. All right. So that these organizations, these mechanisms need to be fit for purpose. We are constrained by the fundamental physics of our atmosphere. We have 10 years to halve emissions. You have to work backwards from what we have to reach in 10 years. There is just no time for 1.5 years to dither and ask a million questions and ask for hundreds of hours of work, eliminating every possibility. We must embrace risk. We must be happy if 2 things out of 10 work, but we just have to be so much faster. So to the youth, please keep shouting, take charge of your future. And next I'd like to introduce from wonderful Namibia, Sharonese Bush, who is the Vice President of the Pan-African Youth Union, our final speaker today.
A wise man once said, "We must become bigger than what we have been, more courageous, greater in spirit, larger in outlook. We must become members of a new race, overcoming petty prejudice, owing our ultimate allegiance not to nations, but to our fellow men within the human community." That was Haile Selassie, a former emperor of Ethiopia. My name is Sharonese Bush. This morning, I'm going to share with you a few patterns of my truth. I was born and raised by a single mother. Life was not very kind to me. I grew up in an underprivileged home where I was the eldest of 2. My brother and I, because of the situation at home, had to change our education at least 5 times, changing schools from private education to public education, simply because my mom could not afford private education. The first pattern of my truth that I'd like to share with you this morning, dear delegates, is consistency. When I moved from private education to public education, there was a perception in Namibia that when you go to public education, your chances of succeeding one day, your chances of being successful is very slim, because public education, the system was not simply trusted. And that is when the student activist in me was birthed. I always questioned, I always disrupted, and I was always intrigued by simply wanting to do more. When I joined the public education system, when I was in high school, I immediately knew that I had an opportunity to change the narrative around public education. That allowed me to become more disciplined, to study hard, and to make certain sacrifices. I joined the Children's Parliament when I was grade 11. The Children's Parliament is a platform that the Namibian government created to ensure that young people had an opportunity to influence legislation as young MPs around issues that affect the children in the country. At the time, young teenage girls who fell pregnant when they were in high school could not return back to school. They needed to take a leave of absence from school to focus on the baby and then return back to school. As the Speaker of the Children's Parliament that I led with my fellow young MPs, we immediately looked at, is that really fair to the Namibian girl child? We organized ourselves. We looked at the framework. Is there any regulation around ensuring the Namibian girl child does not get left behind? And through the Children's Parliament, we then influenced the Namibian Child Care and Protection Act that looked at providing social security and safety to the Namibian girl child. Today, I can proudly inform you, dear youth delegates, that because of that act today, a young girl, if she falls pregnant in school, is allowed to immediately return to school and complete her education. After the Children's Parliament, I then moved on because of my deep commitment to development, especially to youth development. I joined student activism on campus, where I was a student at the Namibian National University of Science and Technology. As a student activist, I realized that our university produces graduates. The University of Namibia, Namibia's national students, Namibia's University on Science and Technology, our private institutions, but our graduates, when they're done with their education, are unemployed. And youth unemployment is a phenomenon not only known to Namibia. So how do we ensure that graduates that are educated become social actors when they're done with school? Through my activism, through my work in Namibia's National Students Organization, together with my team, we then looked at how do we align the skills that we learn in high schools and universities to make us job creators and not simply job seekers. So we again went back to legislation and looked at the Namibian Education Act. Through our advocacy, through our organization, as the student leaders at the time in our country, we then rallied together the stakeholders, went to government and said, it's time we call a national conference on education. We need to look at our quality of education. We need to look at the cost of education, and we need to look at how accessible education is in Namibia. I'm very happy to share with you, dear youth delegates, that in 2013, Namibia hosted, through the advocacy of the Students' Organization, its second ever conference on education, where we reviewed the state of Namibian education. How do we align the Namibian education to be responsive and to be relevant to the job market? And that again is through high level of organization and advocacy. From the Students' Organization, I then had an opportunity after leaving student activism to join the Commonwealth Youth Council as the representative for Africa and Europe. My first and primary focus was to popularize the structure that is the CYC. Because it's fine and well to have a title, but it's the second thing to understand the mandate, to make meaning of it, and to ensure that as young people, we can be held accountable for the work that we're doing in the CYC. So for the time that I was in office as a regional representative of Africa and Europe, I fundamentally looked at making sure that young Africans are aware that there's such an office, what is the mandate of such an office, how do they have access, and how can they participate in such an office. This all happened while I was a youth leader. When I left the CYC, I got a call from the head of state, President Hage Geingob, the current president of Namibia. At the age of 25, he then asked me to join his office and serve as a personal assistant in his private office. So I then served our current head of state as a personal assistant at the age of 25 for a period of 5 years. To me, when the president called me, my first reaction was, how does the president know I exist? How does the president have my number? Why is the president calling me? And when I went into office, my first question to the president was, Mr. President, how do you even know that Sharonese exists? And he's like, you have a track record in youth leadership. You have done exceptional work. And because of your commitment to the Namibian youth, I want you to help me set up the digital space of my office, which is the president's social media and the digital footprint of the Namibian presidency. I took up that task with the honor that it came with to serve my country at the highest level with a president who allowed me to see for 5 years how a state is being governed and run. I learned immensely at the time that I was a personal assistant to the president. I fulfilled my mandate. And when I felt that I've served my part to the president, I left in 2020. In 2020, I then stood to be elected as the executive chairperson of Namibia's National Youth Council, of which I'm currently the head of. I'm sharing my story with you, fellow youth delegates, to tell you that, yes, sometimes we are ordinary youth, but we can do extraordinary things. Never in my life did I feel that one day I'd serve not only our president, to have an opportunity to serve in the presidency, but I also had an opportunity to become a global leader through the Commonwealth. Currently, I serve the African youth as the vice president of the Pan-African Youth Union for the Southern region. At the Pan-African Youth Union, we are a continental coordinating body that stems from a resolution of the African Union's Head of State's General Assembly that informed as young people we need to be coordinated, we need to be better organized at a continental level. At PYU, we believe that mainstreaming youth development is going to ensure that Agenda 2063 will not only be a pipe dream, but the best investment we can make right now is to invest in our African youth. The Pan-African Youth Union further then believes in digital inclusion, where we know the challenges that we are faced with as African youth, that people are talking of the fourth industrial revolution, but we still have inequality in our spaces. But I'm here to tell you this morning, dear fellow youth, especially the youth on the continent, that we need to leapfrog. And my message this morning here to you is that what the former president of South Africa once said, Nelson Mandela, everything seems impossible until it's done. So my encouragement to you, fellow youth delegates this morning, is to take the first step. I thank you.